Donald Trump has threatened the BBC with $1 billion lawsuit, just as left-wing media have launched an attack on GB News and other outlets, calling accusations of BBC bias a politically motivated attack. Over the weekend, the BBC's Nick Robinson hit out at Boris Johnson and said there was a political campaign by people who want to destroy the corporation, after a leaked report from inside the BBC acknowledged institutional bias and a misrepresentation of a speech given by Donald Trump before the January 6th riots. Here's what the BBC showed compared to what the president actually said.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
On Monday, Robinson criticised the BBC, but alluded to political interference with its operations.
One source described the arguments that have raged ever since The Telegraph published a leaked memo by a former advisor to the BBC board as, and I quote, like armed combat, another alleged political interference after what they described as a hostile takeover a part of the BBC.
Later in his monologue, he appeared to connect the revelations with figures on the right.
That argument has been led in particular by one board member, Sir Robbie Gibb, a former BBC executive in charge of political programmes who became Prime Minister Theresa May's Downing Street Director of Communications, is one of those involved in the founding of GB News and a supporter of the Conservative Party. Friends of Sir Robbie insist he has repeatedly and consistently supported Tim Davie as Director General and wanted him to stay.
He then seemed to defend the widely condemned Panorama edit, for which the BBC itself has apologised. The row over BBC bias has seen its director Tim Davie and BBC News CEO resign. She told reporters BBC journalists were not corrupt.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
Why did you fail to deal with the mistakes that were made?
And see my teams. Thank you so much.
Right, we're going in now. Do you think that the journalists are corrupt, like President Trump says? Do you think the journalists are corrupt?
Of course our journalists aren't corrupt. Our journalists are hard-working people who strive for impartiality, and I will stand by their journalism.
Is there institutional bias at the BBC?
There is no institutional bias. Mistakes are made, but there's no institutional bias.
But why weren't the mistakes dealt with on Trump, on anti-Semitism, on women's rights?
I'm sure that story will emerge, but for now I'm going to go in and see our team.
Do you think the board acted against you? Do you think the board acted against you?
This way, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Donald Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, slammed the BBC and called on viewers to switch over to GB News. Nigel Farage reacted this morning to news of the resignations.
Well, I did notice that Donald Trump's press secretary, Catherine Leavitt, suggested British viewers watch GB News, not the BBC, which was quite interesting last night. Look, I don't know who comes in from outside, but it's got to be somebody from the outside. As I said, I think it's somebody from the private sector. It's somebody that's gone into a failing organisation and has turned around not just the profitability of the organisation, but turned around the culture of the organisation. And my worry, Olivia, with the BBC is it employs its people from such a narrow segment of society that I don't think they think they're biased at all.
Today, Donald Trump told Fox News he could sue the BBC for $1 billion in damages.
Yes, certainly it could be incredibly expensive for the BBC. And as you say, the rain has stopped and the lights behind me have gone on, these blue lights on the new broadcasting house here. And Martin, I don't know if you wear a mood ring. Of course, that's a ring that changes colour on your mood. Well, the blue light suggests a calm, relaxed and at peace person. probably not the most accurate reading of how the BBC is currently feeling, going through that legal letter from Donald Trump that they received earlier on today. We've obtained a copy of that letter here at GB News, and I can tell you what Trump is demanding from the BBC. I can tell you he's got three demands. Firstly, that they immediately issue a full and fair retraction of what they describe as false, defamatory and disparaging and misleading and inflammatory statements about President Trump. Secondly, they want the BBC to immediately issue an apology for those statements. And thirdly, they want President Trump to be appropriately compensated. Well, they are issuing this legal letter threatening the BBC under defamation law in Florida, and have given the BBC up until 10 p.m. here in the UK on Friday to respond. And if the BBC don't respond, that legal letter goes on to say that they could file legal action for no less than $1 billion. It ends by saying the BBC is on notice. Well, that is, as you say, Martin, a huge sum of money. In pounds, that is just over £750 million, or the same amount of money as it would cost to make Strictly Come Dancing for the next 53 years. So an extraordinary sum of money. And who would pay for that? Well, potentially licence fee payers. Of course, there are 22 million households in the UK who pay a licence fee. If each one of those households was having to pick up some of this bill, it would be an increase to the licence fee next year of around £33. So who knows what will happen in this legal challenge. Trump's given the BBC up until Friday at 10 p.m. to respond, and the BBC in relationship to this letter have said that they are looking through the letter and working out how they will respond now. But of course comes after the BBC chairman issued an apology for that BBC Panorama documentary about President Trump earlier today, and also not just about that President Trump documentary, but also more widely allegations of systemic bias at the broadcaster. I can tell you the chairman in his apology letter said that they accept that the speech was edited, President Trump's speech on Capitol Hill was edited to give the impression of a direct call for violent action. And he went on to say the BBC would like to apologise for that error of judgment. He said that since these claims have come to light, they've received more than 500 complaints, that they will now go through the proper complaints procedure here at the BBC and answer all of those complaints individually. But of course, a huge number of different issues raised in this 19-page memo sent to BBC bosses by Mr. Prescott earlier this year, that external advisor to the Editorial Standards Committee at the BBC. Well, the BBC have said that they are committed to revisiting every item on that report, and Samir Shah, the BBC's chairman, said he will personally ensure the BBC continues to take necessary action to ensure that the BBC retains trust and confidence in the public. Right now, that couldn't come at a more important time as they seek to renew their charter, which ends, Martin, in 2027.
In a letter to the broadcaster, lawyers for the US president accused it of false, defamatory, disparaging and inflammatory statements. Trump has reportedly given the BBC a Friday deadline, demanding a full and fair retraction of the documentary and any other false statements about President Trump, or face $1 billion lawsuit. The BBC says it has received a letter, but is yet to confirm its contents. Chairman Samir Shah has apologised for how the Panorama episode was edited. Nick Dunning, GB News.